Hello, I'm Pablo Rocco, and you're listening to Reprint, brought to you by the Temple News. Your in-depth look into the stories you need to know about. Temple's newly elected president, John Fry, has just begun work this week, so I speak to news editor Nurbanu Sahin about what students and faculty expect from him. Then I speak to features editor Bayleh Alexander about what the community expects from him. So John Fry has officially taken office as of November 1st, so a couple days ago. He released a video with some of his priorities and how he'd like to run the school. But Nurbanu, you wrote an article about what he said and kind of what students and faculty are looking for. So tell me a little bit about what he said in that video.
Yes, so the video, it was basically like a welcome video. He was addressing like students, the administration, the faculty, and also like the alumni across the world. There were like 5 components of it off the top of my head, if I can remember. Campus improvements, admissions, like enrollment type of stuff. There was a lot of stuff about public safety. Yeah. So it was just like a general thing of, what he wants to embark on his journey as president at Temple. Yeah,
for sure. And then, how have people's initial reception, been of him so far?
I'm going to be so honest. When I was canvassing, a lot of students did not know we were getting a new president.
Really?
Which was very concerning. Yeah, I think by the 5th or 6th student, me and Evelyn were just like, wow. Because we asked a guy and he was like, we're getting a new president. And I was like, yeah, he's actually here tomorrow. Or a lot of people knew he was coming in but didn't know who he was. Some people knew that he was from Drexel. And then there was a lot of people that knew a lot about him because of the announcement that came out in July when they were like, John Fry is going to be our next president. So, yeah, there's like a mix of like how much people knew. It was definitely a big scale of people who did not know anything at all to people who know a lot about like his previous like tenure at Drexel and like another university.
Right. And, what are the main priorities people are looking for from him to accomplish?
There's a mix. I know like generally public safety is a big one on Temple students' minds. Like people want increase in public safety. Campus development is probably also a big one. A lot of people want like, more buildings, like the Klein building to be finished or like a new quad. And then there's some people that say we don't want anything changed at all because that is unfortunately a big thing. When Fry was at Drexel, a lot of things he oversaw big developments. There was like a $3.5 billion development in the university city area. And he also like worked on higher education projects over there. So a lot of students expressed that they don't want anything similar in the North Philadelphia area because unfortunately gentrification is a big topic that's talked about here. That it happens a lot, and sometimes we do need to like realize that we're in someone else's community. Temple does not own North Philadelphia.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's been, and you'll hear later on in the episode from Bayleh Alexander about what the community thinks. But I think that was probably like the biggest criticism of John Fry for
definitely
gentrifying, as
Evelyn's
people say.
trademark.
Yeah. The neighborhood in West Philly, but I was surprised to see specifically the poll about like approval ratings what people think about him, and a lot of people, and I think that probably adds to people not knowing about him, but a lot of people were indifferent about him.
35%, I think, somewhere around those lines. A lot of people just don't know about it. I mean, there are people like the ideas for some people is just like they just go to school here, and it doesn't really affect them directly, which I mean everyone can have their opinions on that. I do think just having your opinions about the university president, like what they've done before, is important because it does affect us. That's why a lot of the people also brought up tuition, because Drexel's tuition has gone up in the time that Fry was president. I'm sure it's not directly a part of him, but he also did gain a lot of funding from alumni, which allowed him to enhance the university more. So of course, like price is going to go up.
Yeah, for sure. I think an interesting part of the article too is like the talk about athletics. Was he alluding to like potentially wanting a stadium around campus?
So the main question was he going to keep football at all?
Right.
Because there was op-eds about it, like his thoughts on like collegiate football, but then there was also like the Inquirer interviews he did where he's like, I'm not getting rid of Temple football. I just think like we should like focus improvements to like the places that can actually have us make it, like the basketball programs and such. Lots of stuff on like, because NIL is new, so he wants to like just see like what the student experiences are and stuff. We included the part about the stadium because there is that mixed group of students, a lot of them that don't want to build a stadium
Right.
on campus because, again, gentrification.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of money that Temple, probably doesn't have. Not to say that, we're going downhill, but it's a lot of money. It's like $130 million. And there's a lot of people that also think like we shouldn't pay the Eagles all this money, just to like rent out their stadium for a few days. And then there's also the people that think Temple football is just a drain on the university anyway. So it was important for us to include like all of like the, should Temple get a stadium or should Temple continue to pay the Eagles?
For sure. Yeah. And I think the biggest point of discussion here, especially this year, is student activism.
Mm-hmm.
Just some of the running points.
Yeah.
He was criticized, for how he handled SJP at Drexel. People also pointed to him visiting Israel in 2011 to meet with leaders about higher education. TURA, the RA union, is, I think a month past when the university was either supposed to approve or deny their union status. How is student activism going to be handled with John Fry?
So President Fry has seen a lot of like student activism on his campus at Drexel, especially beginning with like his statements on October 7th of 2023. Mm-hmm. A lot of students had a lot of reactions to that. They think like he sided with the other side a bit too fast.
Right.
And also like the programs that Drexel has where students can study abroad in Israel and like their like kind of sister university relationships. He did go out there to visit them like maybe like 12 years ago. So that was brought up. A lot of students, like from the Temple poll, like Temple News poll, that was kind of their concerns. They hope that when he comes here to Temple, like he'll hopefully pursue like divestment was brought up. I know that's like a common thing. So it was like that. Then for TURA, obviously, the Drexel residence assistants did unionize around his time. It was last spring semester. They were ratified, I believe, a month later, if I'm not wrong on that. And they're currently negotiating a tentative agreement with the university. Obviously another president has probably taken that over now that he's at Temple, but we're seeing like a similar thing here. When I talked to Mario from TURA, they did mention like they hope like Fry is a little more like open to the idea than the administration. They might possibly do another letter just because he's new and he wasn't here during that time. There's a lot of stuff there. I know when I talked to TSG's president, Ray Epstein, she told me that that she saw, and after she reached out to like the Drexel student government, Fry is very accessible to students. Okay. They said he was the most accessible president they've seen. And she said Jody Bayleh also said the same thing to her from the administration. Like this was the first time that she'd seen a president like that was really engaged with trying to get students and like their voices and their experiences. And I've also seen that in the interviews that he did with like Sam O'Neill, where he mentioned like he wanted to hear from student athletes and their experiences and what they think could make programs better. So there's definitely an effort on his front to connect with the student body more. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, what I think might be an interesting, question is either from what you've heard from people or your own personal opinion. Is there a sense that maybe him coming from another Philadelphia area university is almost an asset to Temple as well, rather than bringing in an outside person?
I think so. I think he knows Philadelphia pretty well. I mean, North Philly is probably different than West Philadelphia. Right. Very different. Yeah. I'm not going to say like University City and Temple area are the same thing. But this isn't his first Philadelphia university. Like, he was the executive vice president at UPenn for a few years, and then he went over to Drexel or Franklin and Marshall. So he definitely has experience with the area, and I think it is beneficial because it's not someone who just comes from like an outside college. It's someone who knows the area. And we've had that history before with President Engler, President Epps. Like, it's people who know the area. I mean, he probably will have to learn about Temple as a whole, or North Philadelphia also as a whole. But I think overall, it is definitely very helpful to us that it's a president that knows our city.
For sure. Well, you have anything else you want to say on this? Or?
No, I'm interested to, see how his tenure will continue. Obviously, he started Friday. Like, it's just... He's still getting warmed up. Yeah, I actually saw him walking down. He was getting a tour from student tour guides, so that was pretty cool. Like,
it's pretty funny.
So he, even on his first day, he was on a little walk. So I mean, I'm interested to see how it will work out. I'm interested to see public safety is his first like priority right now. Interested to see how that will go out. I know he wants to talk to like the department and just get an idea of what's going on. So it'll be definitely interesting to cover and to see what's going on.
Now I speak to Features Editor Bayleh Alexander about what the community expects from President John Fry. So, continuing our conversation about John Fry, the new president of Temple University, we heard a little bit about what students expect. Now, moving on to what the community thinks about him. So we kind of gave a little bit of context of, where he comes from and who he is. Overall, what was the community reaction to the new hire?
I think a lot of the community's overall reaction initially, when I told them, was either they knew but they didn't really know that much, or they just straight up didn't know.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes into their first problem, which is lack of communication with
Right.
the community. It all just kind of fell together because as I told them we had a new president and this is what we were doing, they're like, oh, I didn't know there's a new president. And then their primary complaints were Temple doesn't communicate enough with us.
Yeah.
Which I found really interesting, and that was pretty much their main complaint.
Yeah, for sure. How deep does the divide between the community and the university run? I know you spoke at the top of the article about a story about, a daughter talking about her with her father about the university. How deep is that divide?
A lot of the families who live in North Philly and North Central specifically have been in these homes for a really long time. It's generational. That's most of the people I've talked to. They're like, I've lived in this house for 60 years. Or I moved from 17th to 18th, and that was their move. So the roots of the community run really deep. And Temple, it's kind of like this weird relationship, and it's kind of like a trifecta relationship where it's the students, the locals, and Temple.
Yeah.
And I think that three-tie relationship makes things a little bit complicated, because things that they're blaming the students for could be rectified by the school, and things that they're blaming the school for could be rectified by the students, and then they blame the locals. So it all just kind of goes in a circle. And I think the main line is that locals were here before Temple,
right,
and North Philly was here before Temple was here. And in order to resolve the tension of basically gentrifying an entire neighborhood and community, they have reparations to make. And not all of the community members were some were yeah, I really love Temple students. They helped me clean up the block, and some had complaints about Temple students. So there are different perspectives on that. But I think as for the community and Temple just really needs to increase their communication on that, and kind of lighten that deep tension that's kind of been generational.
For sure. And yeah, I know it's kind of, I feel like, an interesting situation because John Fry hasn't had the best reputation in West Philly, I guess, in terms of the topic of gentrification. We mentioned in the other news article about him, students' reaction, kind of some of the things he's done to mend that relationship between Drexel and West Philly. And we've spoken on the podcast before about, programs that Temple does to recruit students from the area to the university. So I think, looking in the path forward, do community members think that, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, I guess?
I don't know. It kind of feels like a flat line, I would say.
Okay.
I think their expectations have just been diverted so much by Temple presidents. And every time there's no leadership, Temple isn't new to having new presidents. It's really been tumultuous, as I kind of mentioned in my article. So every time there's a new president, it's oh, these hopes and these promises are being made, and it just doesn't really end up coming to fruition. And they did acknowledge that Temple is an excellent resource, and there are a lot of resources that Temple offers. We just have no idea how to access them. They're really hard to access, and no one tells us. And if you're gonna live in our neighborhood and do these things, and technically have these resources to say that you have resources, but then who's actually utilizing those, and how are you publicizing that? I think that is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and what has John Fry, if anything, said about how he'll be working with the community at this point?
I don't know any off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'm sure there might be one, but I don't know. I haven't seen any.
And I think we mentioned it a bit, communication especially, but what are the biggest, I guess, grievances that the community kind of has with Temple and the students?
I heard a lot about trash.
Yeah.
I think trash is like a huge problem in North Philly among students and locals. The one woman I was talking to was like, students will take out their trash in full good intentions on like a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Trash day is not Tuesday.
Sure.
So then for like 5 days, the trash sits there festering, attracting like bugs and animals. And it just like gets really gross, especially in a city. And she was like, those students like need to be fined, not because I'm anti-student, just because like there's an order to a community. And like when you let a community get disorderly, like it's really uncomfortable to live in. And she's an elderly woman. And she was also talking about how like the parking near campus is like awful, and she like has to walk blocks as like a really elderly woman to like get to her apartment, and there's just like students taking over her parking. And she was kind of talking about like how like when Temple expands into the neighborhood, it just takes up more space that they don't have. And it's just like, I think that was her biggest grievance. And then another one that I heard was safety concerns. Not even like within like the Temple students, there were some like with partying and like the loudness. And there was the incident that one of my interviewees mentioned where a student fell off a rooftop, and it was really traumatizing for the community. But also just like public safety on corners and like increasing police control on blocks where people gather.
What was interesting to me, and I've gotten the sense speaking to community members in the past, is there was a quote around the lines in your article of like, almost in terms of safety, talking about safety, what's good for Temple students is, you know, almost great for the community too. Which I think kind of goes into every problem when you look at trash, communication, and all that. As we, you know, improve the situation for students, the kind of community is lifted up, you know, with it. Do you get that sense as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it really comes down to our core values. When everything works together, it's really nice. Like no one really wants to be ostracized or left in the dust or hierarchy. Like I really don't think that's how this should work, and I don't think that's how anyone really wants it to work. But it is odd with Temple being this like overarching like statue over the students and community. I feel like like how you said, like what's good for the students is good for the community, and what's good for those two is good for the school. So if they could kind of learn that balance, I think that would really benefit everyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So, you know, picking up, I guess, from what the community says, you know, what is your expectations for John Fry when working with the community?
I hope in his initiatives he's serious about it. I think there's a lot of talk and no action sometimes, and we hear of these great ideas and it gives us a lot of hope and we cling to that, and then we just never, it's like, oh, whatever happened to that? I hope there are actual initiatives placed that actually benefit people. Like a plan is no good without a outcome. So I really hope that's what he makes out of his presidency.
Thank you, our editors Nurbanu and Bayleh, for joining me on this episode, and make sure to check out all their work on the Temple News website. I'm Pablo Rocco, podcast editor for the Temple News, and you're listening to Reprint.